So in my recent gaming room setup video that I released a little over a month ago, I mentioned that I still needed to get a nice set of white desktop speakers and asked if anyone had recommendations. I was blown away at how many responses I got, and after looking online and doing a little research on every single one that was suggested, I ended up going with the pair that I thought, in my opinion, not only looked the best, but also had glowing reviews. In this video, I'll show you which ones I ended up going with, as well as walking you through how I built some custom acrylic edge-lit speaker stands that might actually be the most tedious project I've ever done. Now to get things started, the first thing I did was order a couple 12 by 12 inch acrylic squares with a thickness of a ½ inch or approximately 13 millimeters. And speakers can end up being pretty heavy, so getting it in this size thickness should for sure provide a strong enough base for me to use. Next, I had to decide what type of LED lights to go with, and in the end I landed on these SK6812 strips from BTF Lighting that have 144 LEDs per meter. These are individually addressable, plus provide a separate LED just for whites, which is a nice option to have. And furthermore, what's great about these is that they're exactly ½ inch wide, so it's going to line up perfectly with the edge of our acrylic when it comes time to get everything put together. So in order for edge lighting to work, the surface of what you're trying to illuminate has to be frosted. There are different ways you can go about to accomplish this, but perhaps the easiest is to just use a sander. I'm using 220 grit paper, which seemed to work just fine. Now ideally, you could just buy it frosted or what some call milky or cloudy, but I wasn't able to find it like this in the thickness I was looking for. I went ahead and sanded both sides of the acrylic as well as 3 of the 4 edges. Now, since the 12 by 12 inch size is a little too big for the speakers I ended up going with, I borrowed my brother-in-law's table saw to cut these down to the size I want. I am just using the standard blade that this came with and going nice and slow, but the cuts did end up coming out perfect. Next up, I need to create something to put the LED strips in. This is where having a 3D printer would be very helpful, but since I don't have one, I'll start things off by cutting 4 small 1/4 inch slices from a 1 inch square dowel. Here I'll be going back to the table saw and using that same piece of wood, I'll be cutting a groove out down the middle that's a ½ inch thick. Now once the groove's complete, I'm going to cut this into 2 shorter sections that will be the same length as our acrylic, and then eventually I'll use the end caps that we sliced off earlier to enclose things. I also went out and got this ½ inch wide and very thin piece of aluminum. I'm going to put this on the bottom of the channel to help with heat disbursement from the LEDs, plus the adhesive on the back of the lights will stick much better to this compared to just the wood. At this point, I'm going to take the router table out and make a very small incision on one side of our wooden pieces. This will create a large enough gap when the end caps are attached that I should be able to run the wires from the LED strip through. So moving on, I spent some time online and nothing really jumped out in terms of an actual stand, and due to the limited space I have on the desk, I figured I'd have to come up with something myself. I went to my local hardware store and picked up a lot of different angles and attachments from their metal piping section to see if this might be an option. After playing around with things for a little bit, I came up with a design I thought might work. You can get these in different sizes, but I went with a 3/4 inch option, which I'm hoping will still give me enough room to feed cables through so that in the end, no wires will be visible. Now before moving on, I want to thank the sponsor of today's video, Aura. So this is me signing up for their free 14-day trial, and during the setup process, one of the many things they do is scan the internet for data brokers that have your personal information. These data brokers then make a fortune selling your information to spammers, scammers, and other entities that want to know more about you. Now, Aura was able to find 30 such instances of my personal information being in the hands of these companies. Then, with one click, Aura sends out a notice to have my information removed from their systems, which they are legally required to do when asked. Their all-in-one platform offers antivirus protection, credit monitoring, credit lock, financial transaction alerts, secure VPN, identity protection, parental controls, 24/7 US-based customer service, and much, much more. I'll leave a link in the description for you to start your own free 14-day trial, so please make sure to check them out. Thank you all so much, and now back to the video. Next, I'm going to remove the key light and mic arm from the setup and take the base piece of the stand that we just put together and trace a spot on the table where I want things anchored. I'll first drill some small pilot holes before switching to a larger 1/4 inch bit. Now as far as being able to feed the wires through the table, I'll use this 3/4 inch hole saw attachment to make the larger cutout in the middle. And then after unplugging and moving the PC back, I'll be doing the exact same thing on the right side. So we also have to get our acrylic piece connected to the top part of the stand. I'll first trace out the holes, and then I'll use a 1/2 inch Forstner bit to go a little less than halfway through the plastic, which will allow our screw to sit below surface. And then use the same 1/4 inch bit from the previous step to go the rest of the way through. Here I'll switch back to the Forstner bit, but this time a 3/4 inch one for the center cutout. Now to keep in line with my mostly white themed setup, I'll be spray painting both the wooden channels and the stands using this Paint Plus Primer Ultra Matte from Rust-Oleum. After letting things dry for a couple hours, it's definitely looking pretty good. I'll probably go back and do a few touch-ups here and there by hand, but overall I like how everything's coming together. So let's switch gears and go over how we're going to get the LEDs set up. I could just cut off the first LED, but for the sake of not wasting anything, I'm going to take this strip and cut back the heat shrink at the beginning to expose the wires. I'll then use my hot soldering iron to remove all the pre-soldered connections, since I want to attach my own 18-gauge silicone wires instead. Now I won't spend too much time on this process, since everything I'm doing here I do go over in extreme detail with close-up footage in a how-to solder video I made recently that I highly recommend checking out if interested. Once this is complete, I'm going to attach the aluminum piece to the wood with some super glue. Then I'll figure out exactly how much of the strip I need, make the cut, and then attach it to the bottom of the channel using the 3M sticky tape backing. And this is where the little notch that we cut out earlier using the router table comes into play. The wires will hopefully fit in the gap, allowing us to put the end caps on for a more clean and seamless look, which I'll again be using some more super glue to attach. Now that we have our LEDs put together, we can move our attention back to the acrylic pieces. Here I'll take some 1/4 inch screws that I believe are 1 inch long and slide them into the countersink holes that we made previously, and then secure on the other side to the top of the stand that we just spray painted. So here I've just slid on the LED piece to see how things are coming together, and so far so good. Next, I needed to come up with something to slightly raise the speakers off the acrylic because I need a little space to run the wires underneath and through the piping, as well as providing some buffer to reduce any vibrations. I ended up finding this 10mm thick foam roll that should work perfect. I'll be cutting it down to a much smaller size than the base of the speakers in hopes of creating somewhat of a floating effect, similar to the design of what you'd see on a floating bed. And don't worry about making this look too perfect because it's not something that's going to be very visible once everything's set up. Moving on, it's now time to attach the base to the desk. For this, I'll just be using some 1/4 inch thick screws that are 1.5 inches long that will go through the table and secured with the washer followed by a nut underneath. Then I'll be adding the middle section to the base unit, which you can just twist until you have it at the desired angle. And finally, I'll be screwing on our acrylic section that's attached to the top bracket. Now once the left side is done, I'll rinse and repeat everything I just did, but this time for the right side. At this point, it's about time for me to start feeding the wires through. I'll start by sliding the three 18-gauge silicone wires through the pipes that are attached to the LED strips in our wooden pieces. Then I'll move on to feeding the larger banana plug speaker wires through the same spot. And just like before, I'll have to do the exact same thing for the right side. Now I knew going with the 3/4 inch diameter piping wouldn't allow me to simply feed the entire power strip through, so in order for me to make this work, I cut the cable closer to the power outlet side. I'll eventually reconnect everything back together using some Wago connectors, which I'll get into later, but this should now allow me to run the power through the desk, ensuring there'll be no visible cables. And if you hadn't already figured it out by the thumbnail, I ended up going with the Kanto TUK speakers. When doing my research on all the options, I just kept going back to this one, and I know it's personal preference, but to me, they absolutely nailed the design element and created something that really stands out from the crowd in terms of the way they look. And after reading about all the tech that these featured, seeing all the positive reviews online, and not to mention everyone that suggested in my gaming room setup video that I should get these, I was very confident in my decision. Now in terms of a high level overview, these are rocking an impressive AMT tweeter, 5¼ inch aluminum woofer, and all this is wrapped in a modern, clean design with virtually no visible seams on the casing except for the back panel, and you can get these in either white or black. On the front, you also have your headphone jack as well as the volume control that also doubles as a power on and off, as well as cycling through the different input options. On the back is where you'll find the many different types of connections you can choose from. You have your USB input that will automatically sync to whatever computer you're using. There's a dedicated RCA line in, a dedicated RCA phono, an optical for easy hookup for, let's say, a TV if that's something that you wanted to do. And another great feature is that these can also be expanded with the subwoofer with support for automatic crossover, where everything under 80, which is your typical sub frequencies, will get pushed over to the sub automatically. Furthermore, if you want to go the wireless route, it also supports Bluetooth 4.2. I do want to say thank you to everyone who took the time to give me some recommendations for what speakers to get. These are absolutely incredible, and I couldn't be happier with how they sound and look. So it's finally time to get everything set up. I'll start with my active speaker, which will be the one on the right side that will be receiving the main power. Then the left side will be my passive speaker that gets connected using the included speaker wires that we've already fed through the desk and pipes previously in the video. Once this is done, I'll go ahead and move the PC back in place. Now since I did have to cut the power cord to the speakers to be able to feed it through the desk, I'll quickly go over what I did to get them reconnected. I first found this white electrical box on Amazon that'll be perfect for the job. I'm going to drill a couple holes on either side of the box. Then I'll feed both ends of the cut power cord through the holes, which I've already stripped back the smaller cables inside. From here, it's just reconnecting the same colored wires together using Wago clips, closing the box up, and mounting it underneath so that it's not hanging down. I did go ahead and clean up the wires in the back a little bit using some mesh sleeves that do a good enough job of covering up the different colored wires to give everything an overall cleaner look. And the last thing I'll be doing is applying some white matte paint by hand to cover up the silver screws that I used to secure everything together. Now as I'm finishing up, you may be wondering how I'm going to get power plus control the LED strips that's going to be lighting up the acrylic. I'll simply be connecting them to the power unit that's already underneath the desk and using a separate pin on one of my 4 ESP32 devices that I have loaded with WLED and mounted underneath. And I won't go over this process of getting things hooked up, since you can just watch the complete DIY video I made of getting the desk set up, which goes over all this in detail. So that about does it for this project. I'll leave you with some final pictures and videos of everything set up. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, I hope you have a blessed day.